Today's project is making a wooden sign for my wife. She's asked for a 10 by 20 wooden sign so that she can make something creative for me for Father's Day. So I'm gonna make the template for her so that she can do whatever she wants to do to that wooden sign. So she needs a 10 by 20. I happen to have a couple pieces of scrap oak laying around in the barn, so I brought those in. I need to rip them down, make sure they're square. I've already measured so that I can cut those at 20 inches, and then we'll get the sides glued together and clamped up, let that dry overnight, and have that ready for staining and off to her within the next couple of days. So let's go ahead and get the table saw set up and get moving. So let's go ahead and get set up to do the cross cuts on both pieces of wood there. One thing that I did notice on those cross cuts is that although this board is the same width all the way through, this is a rough cut edge. So I'm going to run this through and take about 1 millimeter off of the edge of that, just so when I glue things up, everything's nice and flush, and it cuts down the amount of sanding I'll have to do at the end of the project. One thing you should always make sure of when you're using a table saw is when you're done, lower that blade all the way back down so that you don't have any issues with someone coming by and accidentally turning it on, getting their fingers or hands caught in there, especially if you've got little kids around here that like to touch buttons. Next thing that I need to do is I need to get clamps out, and then we will glue this up. When you're gluing up your boards, you might have to play around with it a little bit to see, even though I've ripped these down, play around to see what's going to give you the best appearance. I'm kind of partial to that setup right there, and I have the grain It fits together pretty well. So let's go ahead and glue that. The other thing I do when I'm setting these in the clamps is I get down so that my eyes are level with the board and make sure that I don't have any cupping in the wood, or that it's not pushing up where those two sides are joined together because we have too much clamp pressure. And that one looks like we came up a little bit down here. So I'll release some clamp pressure and push down and retighten and see if we can get that out of there. All right, I like it. So we'll let that glue up overnight and come back, get it out of the clamps tomorrow, and get to sanding. Well, hey there, Sadie dog. You enjoying your dinner, huh? Do you think we should go feed your bird friends? Huh? I think they're getting hungry because they haven't had food in a couple days. Sit. Shake. Good girl. Sit. I want a high five. Good girl. Good girl. Let's go. All right, so we've let this dry for about 36 hours. Let me go ahead and take the clamps off. There's some glue there, but we'll sand that off. All right, so when I am sanding oak lumber like this, it's already pretty smooth, but I got some dried glue on the back side that seeped through when I clamped it. So I'm going to hit it first with some 80 grit to knock off the big stuff or the uneven parts where I ripped this down on the end. And then I'll finish it with 120. Depending on how it feels, I may go through it with some 220 grit as well. But we'll play it by ear for that. So I'll sand all around first, the sides and the flat surfaces, and then we'll get the router out and figure out what kind of edge we want to put on this. All right, whenever I'm working on a routing project, there's a couple of things that I always try to do. The first is I like to set my piece of wood on a towel or some kind of a mat to keep it from sliding around as much. Next thing, we need to pick our router bit. They make a wide assortment of router bits depending on the type of edge that you'd like to put on your piece. Round every bit, which is right here. Now I'm going to use a palm router for this, and I like to use my palm router whenever I'm doing edge pieces. I feel like I have more control over the palm router than I do the larger plunge router. And I also use the palm router whenever I'm doing engraving work. One thing I'll call out is I'm doing this while it's unplugged. You wouldn't want to do this while it's plugged in and risk accidentally turning something on while you've got your fingers around this stuff. That will not end well. I've got it essentially flush with the top of the round over so that I'm only going to get a rounded edge. All right, you can always adjust to give yourself more of an edge, but you can't take it back. So I started mine less aggressive, and that's not much of a lip. So I'm actually going to adjust and lower my bit down a little bit. Let's give that a try. Alright, that's definitely more of the edge that I'm looking for. The other thing that you'll notice here is when I'm going around the corner, it's very easy to tear that corner out, meaning it takes a chunk of wood out and ruins your finished piece. What I try to do when I am going around that corner, right before I get to the edge, I start to turn my router into the corner while keeping pressure against the work surface so that I have evenly distributed pressure all the way around that corner edge. What can easily happen is if you just go straight to the edge and don't keep pressure all the way around that corner, if you go straight off the edge and then come back to it, you're almost always going to blow that edge out. The other thing I like to do with any sign that I'm making is put a keyhole. And this is a special template for the keyhole slots. What you do is you align this to the back of your piece of wood to where you would want to eventually have a hole that would allow you to hang the piece on the wall. Here's our back of our piece of wood. There's your template. You have a router with a guide collar on it that'll allow you to plunge down into that piece of wood as to whatever depth you choose. You use a keyhole router bit, and then when you're done routing that, it leaves you a cove where you can slip over that nail or screw head and slide on. And it's a very easy and quick way and clean way of hanging your finished projects. First thing that I do is I look at my sign and figure out how do I want that hanging on the wall. So we're going to set it like that. When I flip it over, my keyhole is going to be on this edge. Alright, it looks like I actually have my keyhole bit still installed in this plunge router. If you couldn't tell already, I have an affinity towards Bosch routers. I've beat these things up quite a bit, and they're still running like day one. So one thing you will notice you have to have with these keyhole jigs, you have to have an aftermarket base on there that allows these collared guides. You can buy kits with multiple of these. This allows you to do essentially trace different templates. They make letter templates that you can use so that you don't have to freehand them. You can just follow the letter and get a professional looking. And you'll see what we do is you set up in your template, plunge your router into the work surface, and then it guides you so you have a perfectly straight piece, which is very convenient. So my workpiece is 20 inches long, so I'm marking center at 10 inches. And then what I want to do is figure out the length of my template, which is 9 inches. Half of that is 4.5. And so I'll mark that with a pencil so that I can tell exactly where to align that. And that's about 1/4 inch. So next thing I want to do is just take a 1/4 inch measurement, mark on both sides, and that is where I'm going to align my template. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect because you do have some leeway where you have enough of a slot that you end up with that you can move the sign to the left or to the right and level things out. I want to keep it from moving side to side, but I also want to prevent it from moving up and down. So we're going to put tape on the sides and across the work surface. The most important part in this process is making sure that you have your depth set to the correct depth. And so what this plunge router has built into it is some different adjustments. This spins and allows you to only plunge to whatever depth you choose, and it's easily adjustable. So I'll set this on the edge of the work surface, get down level where I can see how far I'm plunging. The other thing you have to do is you have to account for the depth of your template. So go deeper than what you think it's going to require. You really only get one shot of this, so you have to make sure you've got it where you want it. All right, here goes nothing. I think that bit is getting a bit dull. That along with the hard oak wasn't liking that too much, but the end result is the same. Got a little screw here. So imagine that this screw is attached to your wall. You're sliding the workpiece over that and then centering it on your wall. And what you've done is created a ledge inside of your workpiece that's going to prevent that from falling off of the head of that screw or the head of that nail. I'm a fan of the Minwax brand finishes. Puritan Pine is one of my favorite, especially on oak projects. It really pulls the grain out of the wood piece. It does give it a little bit of a yellowish red tint, but it makes the grain pop, and I really like how it finishes up, especially with a nice clear coat on there. Don't listen to what those other YouTubers tell you. You don't need to wear gloves. You don't need to apply this with a paintbrush. Just grab a clean rag. Use the hands that God gave you. All right, and here's the finished side. This side's really gonna pop. This was the best grain. It's the smoothest. So let's get that applied. All right, we're gonna let that dry until morning. Then we'll come back. We shouldn't need a second coat, but I'll take a look and make sure that we have it evenly applied everywhere on the front, back, and sides. Assuming we don't need a second coat, we'll put some clear on it tomorrow afternoon, and this thing will be done hopefully within the next 36 hours. All right, so it's the next day. This project is nice and dry. I'm gonna go ahead and put a coat of clear gloss polyurethane on here. Oftentimes I will use a foam brush or a foam ruler and apply that to get a nice, really smooth surface. But today I'm going to use this Wipe On Poly, which I've used on furniture before. I use it on baseboards. I've never used it on a sign before, so I'm interested to see how it turns out, how the final sheen is going to be on an actual sign. But I also am out of foam brushes, so this is kind of my only option in order to get this project done on time. Finish. So I'm just gonna dump a little bit of this on the material and rub that in. I'm doing what I'll call the show surface. This is the surface that's going to be displayed, and the edges. Doing that all at the same time. I'll do my couple of coats, or however many coats it takes to get this nice and shiny with an even coat of polyurethane, and then we'll flip it over and do the back. The other thing you want to be careful with is don't leave the surface wet. You want to rub in, especially on your first coat, rub in that polyurethane, let the wood soak that up. It'll tell you when it's ready to start drying, when it's had enough. If you leave any of that polyurethane pooled on the surface, you're not going to be happy with the finish when it comes time to put your next coat on. You're going to end up with bubbles and maybe some cracking, some uneven surface, and you're probably going to end up having to take a really high grit sandpaper and smooth that surface out and kind of start over with your clear coat finish. So this material soaked that up pretty quick, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of extra on there. It is a nice warm sunny day today. Although we're in the garage, you wouldn't want to let this cure in the direct sunlight because that will definitely create some bubbles and an uneven surface. But it'll probably dry a little bit quicker than 8 hours today. I'll keep checking on it throughout the day. Maybe able to get a little quicker. Maybe 5-6 hours from now, we'll come back and put the second coat on. All right, I've got 2 coats of poly on this today. It's looking good. I'm going to put a third and I think a final coat on here. And then we'll flip it over and do the back. Probably later this evening. All right, let's give that a couple of hours to dry and then we'll come back and flip it over, do the other side. All right, we've got the third and final coat on the front facing part of the sign. I'm really happy with how glossy that is. It's nice and smooth. Before I flip it over, one of the things I wanted to make sure is it's not tacky at all, and this one's good. So I'm comfortable flipping it over and putting a coat on the backside. So let's do that real quick, and then we'll let it sit overnight and be able to call it done tomorrow. It looks really good. Let's call it a night. All right, it's the next day. Everything's dry. I'm really happy with how this turned out. So let's get this to Abby so she can finish her project.